I tend to find the next few questions are what most business owners understand least about their network security. Office firewalls and internet gateways, part 2. In the first part of this section, we looked at how you secure access to the firewall itself. In this episode, we're going to look at how you use your firewall to secure your network. In my experience, organizations typically tend to pay little attention to the content we're going to cover in these next few questions. I'd assume it's because it feels like it should be technical, but it's anything but. This is pure good management and it's really easy to achieve. Question 5. Wow, I'm going to read this question word for word. It's a bit of a mouthful and I get why so many organizations struggle with it. Do you have any services enabled that are accessible externally from your internet routers or hardware firewall devices for which you do not have a documented business case? What's that all about? For the non-techie, that may seem a lot to take in, but it's really a two-part question. And all it's really asking is, do you allow anything through your firewall? And if so, have you documented why you allow it through? Have you got things on your network that need to be accessed from the internet? Often if you've got a phone system or a CCTV system, or even some bespoke software running on your servers that you access outside the office. If you've got something like that, you should have it documented along with a reason why. Why is this necessary? Punching a hole in your firewall can be a security risk, so it's important at an organizational level that you understand what is allowed through and why. It's also really common that stuff gets changed or turned off and the firewall hole is never closed. Having it documented means you can review it periodically and check it's still relevant. Which brings us on to question 6. How often do you check these holes are still needed? This is super relevant at the moment. There has been a big shift to cloud-based systems over the last year. Whether it's your phones, your email, your internal applications, I'm willing to bet a large proportion of organizations that have shifted things to the cloud have not closed the holes that they had open in their firewall. And if they reviewed the access right now, they'd find these things open that didn't need to be anymore. That's why when you've documented what's open and why, you can review that document and then you can instruct your IT team to go and close off what's no longer needed. When you answer this question, you need to tell us about the process you go through to do that review. Typically, what I advise my clients to do is review their firewall policy. Remember we talked about that in part 1? So I asked them to review their firewall policy and flag anything that needs attention. Get their IT team to review the firewall against that document and then confirm back to management all is as it is documented. How often you need to do this is dependent on how often things change in your organization. Typically, once a quarter is not too onerous. And if you've got an external IT provider, build it into your quarterly business reviews with them. Question 7, is everything else blocked? Basically, you need to make sure the default is to block anything else. Most firewalls block anything else inbound by default, but you do need to check. For example, Duratec firewalls are often set to allow all by default. It's sometimes called a deny all rule, and if you're not sure yourself, ask your IT provider to confirm that by default your firewall blocks everything inbound from the internet. Question 8, can you access your firewall remotely? If you've got an external IT provider, chances are they'll have your firewall set up for remote management. It means that they can access and configure your firewall from outside your offices. Even if you don't, your internal team may use it for convenience, or it may be enabled and you don't realise. It's a feature available on most firewalls and you need to check whether it's enabled or not. Note, this only applies if it's directly accessible over the internet. If you have to remote connect to a machine inside your offices, or you have to use a VPN, that does not class as remote access for this purpose. Question 9, Is there a documented reason for this access? If you've answered yes to the question above, have you documented the reason for this access? The point of documenting is to show you've made a considered business decision, and it gives you something to review in the future. Question 10. Is this access protected by a secondary measure? If you've answered yes to question 8, how are you protecting that access other than just a password? The majority of the time, this is usually done by restricting access to a specific IP address. So you can only access the firewall if you're in a specific location. Some firewalls also now support multi-factor authentication, which I always advise enabling wherever possible. If you allow remote access to your firewall, you must use some form of secondary protection. Let us know what you're using and how you've ensured it's in place in the notes section. Question 11. Do all your desktops and laptops have the software firewall enabled? Part of a defense in-depth strategy is to have multiple layers of security. As well as having a firewall protecting the perimeter of your network, you should also have a firewall enabled on each and every computer within your network too. If a threat does get into your organization, it's another defense mechanism to help reduce the risk of further compromises. You should make sure you have the software firewall enabled on all of your machines. Windows, Mac, and Linux devices all have this functionality. On a Windows environment, you could use Active Directory if you've still got servers, or you could use Azure Intune if you've migrated to the cloud. It's a good report for you to be getting from your IT provider each month, confirming the firewall is enabled on each of your devices. Question 12. Is this because one's not available? If you answered no to the question 11, you will need to confirm here it's because there's no firewall enabled for the operating systems you are using. In practice, it's very rare I see this is the case, and rest assured we'll be looking very closely as to why that is the case if you do answer no above. So that brings section 4 to a close. In the previous episode, I covered off the things my clients do to show compliance in this section. I just wanted to add a couple of points here. In the firewall policy we created, I find it really useful to list out all the firewall rules, what the rules actually are and why they are required. As well as that, also include a section for remote access, stating who has remote access, why, and what additional security measures are in place for that access. In the firewall policy we created, I find it really useful to list out the firewall rules, what the rules actually are and why they are required. As well as that, also include a section for remote access, stating who has remote access, why, and what additional security measures are in place for that access. The policy itself then serves as a documented business reason for both the firewall rules and remote access, satisfying requirements for question 5 and 9, as well as giving you something to review regularly and satisfying question 6. In the next episode, we're moving on to the configuration of your computers and how you make sure they are all configured in a secure way. See you then.